Hello, my name is Bruce Miller, and I'm with RimTech Consulting. And our topic today is record versioning in Purview, what I believe to be a good idea on that. So record versioning is a feature of Purview, and it's a feature that we're going to focus on today. And bottom line is this, is that it's a feature that I don't think you should use in order to achieve reliable compliance. So we'll cover that throughout the session and also what to do about it. So first, what does compliance mean? It's important in any EDRMS that you have a way to prove the compliance. And we have training videos and webinars and training courses on that. But either way, bottom line is that you have to be able to prove compliance. So to me, compliance means three things. Number one is that every document in SharePoint adheres to or complies with the official retention schedule. It also means that every document in SharePoint is being managed properly as a record. And that in turn means three things. Number one is the document is immutable. That's the focus of today's session. Second, it's assigned a retention rule, as we mentioned earlier. And third is that 60 or so percent of all modern records are case records, and they have to be properly managed. Case record just means that it's event-driven. The retention rule applicable to it is event-driven. So the key here is immutability, which means the document cannot be edited or deleted throughout its life cycle. And the third and final meaning of compliance is the important one, which is you can do a disposition. Now, what does that mean? Well, dispositions can't just happen by themselves. You have to have sufficient confidence when you do a disposition to proceed with it, because in one button press, you're about to destroy millions and millions of records potentially. And you're not about to do that unless you have full confidence. And how do you know and prove that you have the confidence? You measure the classification accuracy rate and prove that it's above 85% or higher. And that's yet another training session and webinar that we have on our YouTube channel. So how do we go about making all this happen in real life with Purview? So a little bit about Purview, which is I've found that the secret to a proper Purview deployment is three things. Number one, you have to know what features to avoid. Number two, when to come up with a workaround for a feature that doesn't work the way we need it to work. And then finally, when to do custom programming, because some of the features cannot be overcome and you're going to have to pretty much do custom programming. So with Purview, compliance comes from the users, not from organizations. That's the posture of Microsoft, okay? That's a little different than what you might expect. More on that in a minute. It's records management done Microsoft's way, not the way that we would normally go about it. So it's very much their interpretation of what records management means and how to go about it. It's also part of a much larger compliance capability. So when we say Purview, think of it this way. If Purview were a bowling ball, big, heavy, and hollow, inside it, rattling around inside it would be a golf ball, and that golf ball is the records management capabilities. The larger Purview covers a lot more than just records management, and we're focused entirely on the records management piece here. In order to understand record keeping in Purview, you have to learn a new language. That new language is completely invented by Microsoft. They all translate to good old-fashioned terms and terminology in records, but you have to learn the different terms that to translate. This is the big one. It's extremely technical, and I don't mean moderately technical or a little technical. I mean extremely technical. So help from an IT is essential for mastering Purview. And it's not like a typical software product where you buy it, you take a training course, you learn it, you go ahead and deploy it. No, no, no. It's not like that at all. It's not even a software application. Purview lives outside of SharePoint and it has a relationship with SharePoint, and it operates on the SharePoint contents, but it's not meant for end users whatsoever, okay? So you have to master all of its features, understand its features and what it's doing and why in order to apply it. It's not like an ordinary piece of software. So again, as I said, we're focused today on immutability because that comes into play with versioning in records management. So what exactly does it mean? It means that the users can no longer edit the document, make changes to it, or delete it, nor can they make changes to the associated metadata or edit or delete any of that metadata that's associated with the record. Okay, that's what it means. So why is this so important? Well, number one is it's one of the 7 seminal principles of modern records management, which is the principle of integrity and also of authenticity. So in order to meet records requirements, we have to make the records immutable. That in turn makes them trustworthy and unaltered. So this is the scenario you should keep in mind. If you take a document, let's say a document that came from your file share, it's been there 20 years, you print it, you bring it into court and present it as evidence. If the opposing lawyer says, can you guarantee that that document was not altered in any way in that 20 years? If you cannot say yes, then there's a good chance that that document could be dismissed as evidence. So in order to maintain the evidentiary value, the document or the record has to be immutable. It also, of course, makes it more transparent to investigators and audits. And bottom line is it protects you from the risk of any fraud or accidental data loss or tampering. You know, changes can be made to a document accidentally or deliberately. Either way, you have to protect yourself from that. So think about this. This has to be done on a massive scale. You can't cherry pick which records to protect and which ones not to. So it's a pretty big deal. Immutability really, really matters, especially if you get down and dirty in a court battle. So the process is pretty straightforward. You upload your document into SharePoint, and when you are ready to apply a record label to it, at that moment it becomes locked down if you're deploying Purview correctly, which I assume you will. And that means that you're going to apply a record label, which locks it down or makes it immutable, okay? And once it's immutable, again, it's now protected from nefarious or accidental deletion or editing. Now, the big question is, when do we do this? Because there's a problem here, which is the end user really doesn't want anything locked down. Think about this scenario. They put a document into SharePoint and it becomes a record, let's say that day. So a few days later, they're walking down the hall and somebody points out a massive mistake in the document. So you run to your desk, are horrified at the mistake, and you say to yourself, uh-oh, I better make a fix to that. But you can't. It's locked down. And it's going to be up and visible for the next 25 years. That's a massive, massive potential disincentive for people to put their documents in the system as records. But it's real. It's real. So the end user doesn't want it locked down, or if so, as late as possible. Whereas the records manager wants the opposite. We want it locked down as soon as possible. So who wins here? Well, the short answer is the records manager wins, the records program wins, the organization wins. Why? Because that's part of the goal of an EDRMS is to make the system compliant. And the closer we move this green arrow to the document creation, the higher the integrity and the greater the compliance. The further we move it down the line towards the end of its life cycle, the lower the integrity and the lower the compliance. So we need it done quickly. How quick? It could be instant, which is fine. But my rule of thumb, and it's just a rule of thumb, it's not a hard and fast rule, is 60 days after you put the document into SharePoint, that's when it gets locked down. because that's long enough for people to discover and fix mistakes and get a little comfortable with it before they have it locked down on them. And we have found that it's also long enough for people's care level to drop. They move on to other things. So if you're loading a mass of documents, let's say thousands of documents in a migration, then there's no need to delay it. You can lock it down as soon as they're moved in, right? So it's timing sensitive. That's all I'm trying to make with this slide here is pay attention to when you lock things down because you might need to be more sensitive to it in other special cases, such as when people are collaborating on a document for months at a time. So the background to all of this is that declaration, making something immutable and tagging it with a retention rule, has to be fully automated. Why? Because at 12,000 records a day, I'll show you where we got that number in a minute, um, there is no hope for any records manager to intervene, interfere, control, or manage any of those records. The numbers won't allow it. Given that fact, and a very big assumption also that we cannot rely on end users to declare and classify records reliably, then we're stuck. The records managers can't do it. We can't count on the users to do it properly and consistently. So what's left? Automation. So the backdrop to this is everything is automated with Purview. And here are the numbers I promised you right here. Where did that 12,000 come from? Well, let's assume 1,000 users. We have found that a typical user receives 50 emails a day. And typically 20% of those qualify as records, which means 10 records a day per day. And 2 non-emails a day. What are non-emails? Those are documents that existed today that didn't exist yesterday, and they are not emails. So where do they come from? Well, users either created them, or they downloaded them from websites, or they received them from email, or maybe even a machine generated it. Doesn't matter. The total typically is 12. So 12 records per user per day flow into your organization every single working day. So by 5 o'clock, you will have accumulated 12,000 records that single day. Okay, that's 2.7 million a year. So let's say that you need 60 seconds per document to check it, modify it, not modify the document, but correct it, correct the classification of it, or to determine if it's a record or anything at all. 1 minute each. Well, that would mean that the records manager would need 12,000 minutes. That's 25 days of work to check those 12,000 records. So this clearly is just not going to happen. Now that brings me to two schools of thought about compliance. One is, where does compliance come from? Well, one school of thought says it comes from end users. They have a duty to manage their records. And I've seen this written into many corporate policies, especially in governments. You, the user, you're responsible for deciding what's a record and when it becomes a record, and also how to classify it against the retention schedule. Yeah, that retention schedule that you've never seen in 15 years and aren't interested in seeing. So that's one school of thought. The other school of thought says, wait a minute, are you out of your mind? We're not going to rely on users who don't care about records, have never been fired for not caring about records, have never seen a retention schedule. And if you think they're going to do this 12 times a day, you're out of your mind. No, compliance is something we impose on end users. That's the second school of thought. Which one is right? The second one. We need to impose it on end users. Why? Because we've learned over the decades that relying on users to decide what are records and classify them against the retention schedule does not work. I've never seen it work, and I don't expect to in my lifetime. So why don't we just bail out and go artificial intelligence all the way? We don't need records managers or any of this stuff. Well, no, 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 no. That's a topic of another webinar, but definitely not. So the point of this slide is to say that the automation is the only way to go, okay? And out of the box, Purview, Purview's stance or posture is that compliance comes from end users. So we have to reverse that. Now, that's easily done, and we have training and videos on how to do it. But I just wanted you to know that that's the reason why we're here today to talk about versioning, because that's a capability that reduces compliance, but it's in the user's hands. But fortunately, the way Purview was designed, we can take it out of their hands, and that's so important. So that takes us right into record versioning. So what exactly does that mean? Well, it means that despite the fact that it's a record and it's locked down, there's an ability to allow a user to unlock it, which gives them the means of deleting or editing a locked record. While it's unlocked, any change they make is going to trigger a new version. So there's got to be some management of those versions while it's unlocked. And to compensate for that, to protect the integrity of the record, Purview automatically creates a secret copy of that record when it's modified or deleted. So this picture is getting a little complicated already, right? So that's a capability that you need to not allow in Purview, okay? There are ways and means for people to do that, and you have to remove those ways and means, okay? Don't go there. That's the point of this whole session. We could stop right here, but I wanted to explain to you how it all works so that you know the implications of it. Now, remember I said that every time you permit a user to delete a locked record, a secret copy is made. That secret copy is called a preservation copy. I abbreviate it to PC every now and then, a preservation copy. So if any user attempts to delete it or edit the metadata, or unlock it, those four actions, then a preservation copy is triggered. And where do these preservation copies go? They go to a special library in SharePoint called a PHL, Preservation Hold Library. That library is unavailable to users and it's hidden from all searches. So anytime you do a search of an entire site in SharePoint, they deliberately exclude the PHL from it. Otherwise, you get a lot of duplicate searches, right? And in the PHL, all those documents are truly immutable. Nobody can edit them or delete them, okay? Now, every time you make a change to a original document in SharePoint that has been unlocked, Purview creates a version of it. Now, that could mean dozens of versions every single day, times the number of days people played around with that document. Yes, it could be that bad, but there is some version consolidation. In other words, if you make a bunch of changes within a short period of time, maybe an hour, they won't give you 13 versions. They'll create maybe one version for that hour. I don't know their algorithm as to how many they avoid, but it is not a one-to-one. One change equals one version. It's something less. I don't know the full details of it. So if you allow unlocking, otherwise known as record versioning, then the document now takes two paths, or two paths emerge. One path is what the user sees, and the other path is what goes on automatically behind the scenes that nobody can see. Okay, so let's look at the user path. The user can delete that document, and what happens is it will end up in a recycle bin. That's the recycle bin, the ordinary everyday recycle bin. We just call it the recycle bin. But there's actually another recycle bin. So now we consider the recycle bin to be now a first stage recycle bin. So if the user deletes it, it ends up instantly in the recycle bin. And it stays there for 93 days. And then it gets deleted. okay? But what if they go into that recycle bin, which they can get into, and delete it from there? They've deleted the evidence of what they did, right? Well, here's what happens. If it's deleted from that recycle bin, then a copy moves to the second stage recycle bin, which is not available to the end user, okay? So, and then it stays in that recycle bin for 93 days and then it's deleted, okay? So that's what the user perceives. Meanwhile, the first time they attempted that deletion, a copy was put in the preservation hold library, which they cannot see. And assuming there's a retention period, which all declared records would have, it stays in the PHL for the full length of the full duration of the retention period. And then it moves to a second stage recycle bin after the expiration of the full regular retention period. And then it gets deleted after 93 days. Notice there's no user involvement on this side at all, right? So you've got to be aware of this dual path. Now, this is Microsoft's official diagram that shows the path that the document takes if they attempt to delete a locked record or an unlocked record, I should say. So what happens is it goes to the preservation hold library, okay? And what happens, uh, it only makes its way to the preservation hold library if they attempt to delete it or edit it, right? So there's a copy sitting here. Now, what happens to that copy? Well, after the expiration or the end of the retention period, then it goes to this first stage recycle bin and then to the second one, and then it finally gets deleted. So there's a 93-day delay after the expiration of the official retention period. Now, a sidebar note here. As records people, we know that we would never allow a system to delete millions of documents automatically the minute that they expire. No, no, no. We're going to do a disposition review, which is yet another YouTube video and training course, but we would never normally let this happen. So everything I'm telling you is something we wouldn't normally do. But here's what would happen. At the end of the retention period, it gets deleted 93 days later. That's a simple version of it, okay? This is a tabular look at it, which I find easier to understand. This is what we do. If we delete, then it goes to the first stage recycle bin, the original one, and then 93 days later, it's gone, and that's the end of the story, right? But meanwhile, in the PHL, the Preservation Hold Library, there's a copy stored there. Then, 93 days after that, the retention period doesn't affect the copy in the Preservation Hold Library. It doesn't affect it at all. It just sits there until the end of the retention period, which could be 10, 15, 20 years. And when that period is over, then it moves to the second stage recycle bin plus 93 days, and then it's gone. Okay. Now it's a little different if you're applying records control directly to email in place. Not something I recommend you do with native out-of-the-box Purview capabilities, but that's yet another story. We're only here to talk about version control of records. So it follows a similar path, but it's different. The the behavior of the recoverable items makes it a little different. So here's what happens. If there's a retention policy on the message, which we would have, then it's got to be permanently deleted, right? So what happens is it keeps the message and it moves a copy of it to the recoverable items folder. The user can still see it there, right? Now, if they try to delete it or modify the metadata for it, once it's in there, then it creates a copy that moves to the recoverable items folder. No, it moves it out of there, and 14 days later it deletes it. Right. So bottom line is if you edit the email, it triggers a copy to the recoverable items folder. If you delete it, it's essentially a move. There is no more original anymore, so that it only exists in the recoverable items folder. If there's a retention rule applied, then it stays in that folder for that period of time. The user presumably cannot delete it from there, and then 14 days after that, it's finally deleted. Okay? So pretty different behavior there. But again, I don't recommend you do that in the first place. So these are 8 rules of preservation copies that I found convenient to document. I only want to focus in on the first, on the 4 that are shown in red. The preservation copy contains the same label as the original. That's an important point. You don't lose the label on it because in theory, with Purview, you can change that label and you can, under a number of different circumstances. I don't think you should allow that, and thankfully we can disable it, but but uh, just know that the label is with the preservation copy. Now, another way to look at preservation copies is this. Let's suppose you're getting 3 million records a year, which is normal for 1,000 users. 3 million records a year. What percentage of those would people try to delete or edit, hypothetically? Who knows? But let's say half, which is admittedly a bit heavy, but let's say half of them. Well, if that's the case, then at the end of a year, you end up with 3 million records, right? But it's not. It's now 4.5 million. And if you were editing, it could be even more. So, this is an issue to consider. Now, each edit of a unlocked record produces a separate copy. That's true. So if you make 20 edits, you're going to end up with 20 copies of that record. 20 copies plus the original, okay? Just so you know. However, there's some degree of consolidation. It may not be 20, it could be 20, it could be 10. I don't know what their algorithm is, but I suspect it's this. If there's a short time span between edits, they will consolidate. For instance, every half hour or hour or so. Who knows? Okay, co-authoring, which is getting increasingly popular. Co-authoring produces preservation copies. Don't know how many though. I've not tested that. And if you do an e-discovery search in Purview, then the search by default will only include the preservation copies if you select all versions. That's a search option button or setting at search time when you're doing your rediscovery. So that's never forget that, right? Never forget to do that. So this is a table that Microsoft supplies to say what has to happen in order to trigger the creation of a preservation hold copy. The first bunch are straightforward, but it gets increasingly sophisticated as you go down the list. For example, what about a list? Now, what's a list? A list is a set of data in SharePoint acting as a document. For example, you might have a list of all your facilities, the address, the name of the facility. You might have a list of all your vehicles. Who knows? But when you can lock down those lists as records, and when you do, and then you make a change to those list items, what happens? Well, they generate, Purview will generate a preservation copy as an Excel file, okay? So I'm not going to go through every single item in this table, of course, but you should be aware of it, and you should consult that table to find out what is created, when, and why. Okay, very important to know that because every preservation copy is a record that you have to deal with. This is a screenshot of the preservation hold library. Not a lot to see there, but you can see that every item is a record. Important point. So if you edit a document, what triggers a preservation copy? Well, pretty much anything, including the metadata or the content itself. Certainly if you delete it or rename it. But if you move the document, just think about this for a minute. If you move the document outside the container holding it, it triggers a preservation copy. So what does he mean by container? Well, a container is a library or a folder inside SharePoint. I believe a site would be considered a container too. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm not sure. But certainly I am sure that a library or a folder, which also includes DocSet, if you move it from A to B, then it triggers a, um, a preservation copy, but not if you move it within the container. So these are important points to note too. So if you allow this feature, then here's what it looks like. Here we have SharePoint, and we have the record status is shown as locked, right? Locked. So you click in there and you move it to unlocked. That's all it takes. Now, if you look at lists of documents in SharePoint, you'll see that it is labeled with a record, retention label. It's a record, but the record status is now unlocked. So it doesn't have that lock symbol on it anymore. Now, every time you edit it, it'll add the word record to the version list. So the version list now has the word record in every single version that it produces um, as you're going through it. And this is the part that I find kind of disappointing. There's no mechanism to prompt or force the user to relock it. So what does that mean? That means that we can safely assume that every record that gets unlocked is going to stay that way. Why would where's the motivation for someone to lock it back up, really, right? This is just a slide for reference purposes here. It's right off of the Microsoft website, and it goes a little deeper in the detail. Now, this is the key slide of the day right here. This is it. This feature, this whole screen actually was at my request of Microsoft about 2 years ago, maybe less. But I told them, I said, guys, you gotta let us disable some of this stuff. So to their credit, they did. So this is a new settings screen, and you can turn off three things: allowing the users to delete items, allowing the record versioning, right? This whole business of locking and unlocking, which triggers a versioning, and allow users to edit record properties. So there's three things. All three reduce your compliance. I consider them anti-compliant, and you have to turn them off, all three. If you want to be compliant, turn off all three. Now, there's a little bit of controversy in the bottom ones. This is the official posture and statement of Microsoft Purview according to the current documentation as of the date of this recording anyway. When a record is locked, you cannot unlock, you cannot edit the metadata. It's not true. You can. We proved it. We challenged Microsoft with it, and we heard back and they said, yes, you're right. We do allow metadata to change, and we're going to keep it that way. So that's a feature. Now, that's a direct contradiction of this button right here, which is you either allow them to edit record properties, i.e. metadata, or you don't. And I asked for that feature to turn it off, and they delivered it. So now I've got two conflicting things. I've got a button on the screen, which disallows it, and we've turned it off, and it still allows it. Who's going to win that battle, if I can call it a battle? I don't know what they're up to. I don't know what to tell you. But I do know that as of this moment, as of today and this recording, no matter what you set this to, you can still edit the metadata. So that's a bit of an unknown factor here, for me anyway. So that's it. That's everything I wanted to talk to you about record versioning. I'd be remiss not to mention this, which is how to deploy systems faster. I want to paint you a picture of all the steps to deploy Purview, because I think that a lot of records people miss some of those steps, or at least don't understand them. So we came up with a tool called Catalyst to speed up the deployment and make it more reliable and faster. The thing is that there are 6 steps you have to go through for any EDRMS, no matter what record software you're deploying. Okay, doesn't matter what it is. The first step is to take your existing retention schedule and modify it to get it ready for the software. Then generate that retention schedule in a machine readable format that you can load into the software. Then load your retention schedule into Purview or whatever software you have. Okay, that's not a big deal. That should take half a day. Uh, and then the big work starts, which is you have to define SharePoint information architecture, which is what are the sites, libraries, and columns you're going to need in order for Purview to do its job. It's a very prescribed architecture. That could take you a year or 2 or even 3. Then number 5 is once you've got it defined, go create it in SharePoint. That could take you another 1 or 2 years. And then only then can you get around to automating the declaration and classification. That's done via content rules. And in Purview, they're called auto-apply policies. You cannot do that until you've completed steps 1 through 5. And that's the point people miss. Too many people think this. All I have to do is load the retention schedule into Purview and I'm done. No, 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 you're not even close to being done. You have to build out the SharePoint architecture and then get your auto apply policies written, a lot of them. And why do I have to wait until step 6? Why is this the last thing to do? Well, because they depend on the SharePoint libraries and columns already exist. You can't create these rules until that's done. So this is a last piece of the EDRMS puzzle to snap into place. And few people realize that. Too many people think, well, we can just load the retention schedule and we're done. No, 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 not even close. If you want more detail, just look at our YouTube channel or sign up for some of our training. We have training on how to do all this. So what we've done with our Catalyst tools is we have pretty much automated step 5. So we can take a year or 2 right off your project completely by automating step 5. And we're now working on automating step 6, which will probably come in late this year, which will take another up to certainly 6 months off of your schedule. And presumably a lot of money as well. So the whole idea here is deployment takes a long time, many steps, 6 of them. And the 2 biggest ones, we are shortening them greatly. So a project can go from years and years down to days or weeks. So let's summarize what we were speaking of today. So our point is do not allow versioning of records. Why not? It's confusing for end users, very confusing. It creates duplicates of records that I believe are unnecessary, which creates another whole management headache for you. The users can forget to relock. So that's a problem. You know, it's kind of undoes immutability across the board. It also reduces the overall confidence in the compliance that you've achieved. I don't like that at all. Anyway, that's it. Thank you very much for attending. If you want to follow up anything, here are some links you can use. And again, I really appreciate you taking time to attend the webinar live if you did so. And keep an eye out for the next recording. Thank you.